For centuries, we have sought to understand ourselves by attempting to unlock the secrets of the mind. Somewhere in its mysterious depths, it was thought, lay the key to our being, if only it could be found. The brain has been dissected, examined, and analyzed, but now with computer technology, scientists claim they are closer than ever to simulating the human brain, to making conscious, thinking, feeling machines. They believe our thoughts and emotions can be encoded and reproduced. Our dreams, our memories, nothing that can't be expressed in a computer program. They say the fact that we are conscious, self-aware, that we know time passing and our own place in history is nothing special. Consciousness is dismissed as a mere byproduct of the brain, nothing to feel proud of. But if this is true, then perhaps our human sense of self, of identity, of personhood is just a delusion. And where does that leave you or me? What does that say about the way we live or die? Is this reductionism the main legacy of 20th century science?
One way of looking at the operation of the human mind is that it's very analogous to the processes going on inside a computer. You can actually think of the mind as the software and the data of which the brain is the hardware. This leads to the suggestion that it might be possible to extract that software from the hardware, essentially decode the pattern and the process, and perhaps even install it in some alternate hardware, for instance, a sufficiently powerful computer. So this is one very direct way to make a human-like robot, is to build a general-purpose computer with sufficient power to encode the program that normally runs in the flesh and blood of a human brain. About 10 years from now, I believe it's possible to build a machine with the overall mental power of a lizard and probably the personality of a washing machine, which can be programmed to do specific tasks in the physical world. Machinery to date is much simpler than any biological organism, but the complexity, especially in the computer area, has been growing 1,000-fold every 20 years. So this million-fold shortfall that currently limits the work will be gone within 40 years. So within 40 to 50 years, I think we will have the raw computational power to mimic essentially everything that goes on in a human mind. So we should be seeing very superhuman machines in well under a century. I foresee a future in which the robot industries expand off Earth and into the solar system and beyond, growing ever more powerful and doing things ever less related to their roots back on Earth, with Earth becoming a kind of backwater, a game preserve, where biological human beings still live and still imagine they're important.
Lady Blythe, I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
I suppose one of the things we all instinctively feel when we're presented with a new baby is that here is a new person. As a mother, I would say, well, I had 3 sons and they were all different right from the very word go. And most mothers would say the same, that their babies are distinctive. We feel there is more to a person than a kind of mechanical process. And this is particularly true when we come to think about some of the things we regard as most important, what would traditionally be called the spiritual values of love and joy and peace and patience and commitment and loyalty and things of this sort, that they defy the kind of explanations which simply reduce us to a set of brain functions.
It was in the sea that the first molecules combined to produce life. After billions of years of evolution, they formed the complex entities we are today. If science can describe us as a bunch of molecules, does that make the brain no more than a machine? What about the qualities that give us our humanity?
Well, if you tell me that I'm just a machine, I frankly don't believe it, because it just seems to completely negate my own personal feelings, my feelings of free will, the fact that I have experiences, the whole mental realm, which to me is my immediate experience. Now, it's all very well saying that there's a brain in there that has atoms jiggling around and so on, but I don't believe that my conscious experience is nothing but the jiggling of atoms. It seems to me that there is, here we're dealing with 2 levels of description. On the one hand, we've got the individual particles, on the other hand, we've got the complex mental phenomena. And these 2 are sort of running along together and are clearly involved with each other, entangled with each other in an intimate way, but you cannot reduce the one to the other. To say that, that the mind is nothing but the motion of electrons or something in the brain, I find as absurd as saying that life is nothing but the movement of atoms. No atom of my body is alive, and yet to claim that I am not alive is clearly absurd.
What then is the self? What do we mean by human consciousness, by our identity? Is the self just a convenient term for the sum total of our brain functions?
No, thank you very much.
Or is the whole more than the sum of its parts? In our day-to-day life, we feel we have a particular personality. Our choices and desires help to define the person we are. Asleep, when we dip in and out of consciousness, our sense of self and of the world may change, but even our dreams continue to reflect the thoughts and actions of our waking hours. So what is a person? Why do we act the way we do? What we do know is that different activities involve different parts of the brain. In the left resides language and speech, the more logical reasoning powers. In the right lies the potential for the creative, imaginative tasks. What then if the left side were severed from the right? Could they have an independent existence? Would this give rise to 2 distinct personalities, each with its own will, conflicting within the one brain? Computer scientists argue that such a case would make the idea of self ridiculous. The answer to this question lies in a dramatic episode in medical history in Hanover, New Hampshire. To alleviate symptoms of epilepsy, Joe had precisely this operation. He had his left and right hemispheres separated and became a split-brain patient. His seizures have virtually stopped.
You have to go a year without a seizure in order to have a driver's license. I've been going 6 or 7 years now.
What we see in our right visual field informs the left hemisphere, and vice versa. To test what difference the separation of the hemispheres had made, different information was shown to each hemisphere. When a picture was flashed to the right visual field, the left hemisphere, Joe could report what he had seen, because speech resides in the left. When a picture was flashed to the left visual field, the right hemisphere, the response was surprising.
You can, say, flash a picture of a bird to the left hemisphere, and to the right hemisphere, you suddenly flash a picture of a nude. And what you will get is, in a sense, both hemispheres responding. The right hemisphere produces a, and the left hemisphere says bird. And then you might say to the subject, well, why are you laughing? They say, oh, that was a funny kind of bird you presented. It wasn't your usual bird. And there you have a case where the left dominant hemisphere, which is the one talking to the examiner, has to make up an explanation to explain this behavior that sort of was triggered by the disconnected and independent right hemisphere.
The experiments seemed to confirm the idea that a divided brain would produce two personalities.
Hi, Joe, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. How are you today?
Come on in.
However, this was not what Dr. Gazzaniga saw in the way his patients acted in their normal everyday lives. Further tests convinced him that the two hemispheres were not acting as two separate entities. The left hemisphere was dominating and acting as the interpreter for the whole brain.
No, the chickens lay them. It goes onto a machine. Machine brings it right into the me. And they have a building now. So I'm working with a lot of different pieces.
When we first started these studies, it was dramatic and shocking to see what a disconnected right hemisphere could do. Now, what's happened is that we have pursued what the right hemisphere can do, what it really can accomplish. And it turns out that's a very limited set of mental activities. It doesn't have many of the specialized functions that the left has, and the left has the functions that you and I hold dear as being uniquely human.
Wow, huh? That's an interesting age.
It is clear to both patient and doctor that splitting the brain does not split the self. And yet that claim that they do is still made by computer scientists.
There's so many crazy ideas out there as to what the effect of the surgery really was on someone that I don't even recognize them. But the fact is that disconnecting the hemispheres produces someone, as you can see, that is as normal as you and me, and you would have to, in order to drag out the effects that we talk about, you have to use very strict experimental situations and that kind of thing. In normal everyday life, you have a normal everyday person functioning.
If I got two personalities, I'll ignore the other one is. Because it's not so. No, I feel better because of the seizures being gone. But as far as the two personalities or anything, you don't notice anything like that. As a matter of fact, people say I'm just better natured now than I used to be. Maybe that's because knowing I'm not going to have seizures, I'm not so nervous all the time as I used to be.
The self and our consciousness is not so easily explained away. In fact, it appears that many of our conscious experiences are unique to human beings.
The notion that you can take any set of neural tissue with its interactions, and by understanding the input and understanding the output, you can build a person, build a conscious entity, I think is crazy. It's a nice idea, but we just see too many examples where it doesn't make any sense. They have little 180 neural nets that can learn to read. Well, a rat has 3 million neurons per square whatever, and it can't read. It has the same sort of synaptic relationships that the human brain has. That kind of simple neural net kind of thinking, I think, is doomed.
The more we understand about the brain, the less affinity we seem to have with our robot brothers. The day when we transfer ourselves, download to silicon, seems to have been postponed. Indeed, it now looks as if the postponement may be indefinite.
I think If you really want to understand why the brain does not function like a computer, you can ask yourself the question, how do we recognize things? In a computer, the way in which the computer recognizes something is by having a fixed image of that thing and comparing the image that is created through its, let's call it an eye, with the fixed image. In fact, is that the way we recognize things? Not at all. How do we recognize words? We recognize words by the relationships between the letters. And do we spell out the letters to ourselves? No. We see the relationship immediately. How do we recognize a face? Well, a person changes all the time. It's clearly the relationships between the different parts of the face. And consequently, memory from a human or an animal point of view is clearly relationships and has nothing to do with comparing with fixed images. And in that sense, clearly functions very differently from a computer. The brain is always creating relations. And therefore, what do we mean by memory? Memory is also a relation. And in a very general sense, one could say all memories are subjective. My memories are mine, your memories are yours. There's no way in which I can transfer to you my memories. A lot of people in artificial intelligence seem to think you can take a memory out of one machine, put it into another, or take a memory out of a human being and put it into a machine, and we can preserve somebody for an eternity. They're forgetting certain neurological facts that we have learned, and those neurological facts show that it is in fact impossible to talk about memory without talking about its subjective aspect. In fact, a lot of neurologists seem to have forgotten that memory has a subjective aspect to it. And in fact, the subjectivity from the point of view of the brain becomes most evident when you see that you lose all memories when you lose a body image. Now, there's a famous neurological case, a neurological syndrome, where when you become paralyzed on the left side, you sometimes, in some patients, treat the left arm as if it doesn't belong to them. It's known as hemi-neglect.
Now, you originally had this stroke, I think, almost 10 years ago, 82.
As a result of this stroke, Dr. Sachs's patient Michael suffers from hemi-neglect and treats his paralyzed left arm quite differently from his right.
Do you have then a very clear memory of what it was like?
Yes, I do.
Can you describe it?
I got quite dizzy and my eyesight became quite blurry.
Now, when I met you originally, we met in 85 or so, I think you'd already learned to deal with things to some extent. But I remember then you shaved. You had a 3 or 4 day growth. Now, I remember you did the right side of your face, and you said, well, you said, that's it. And I said, you finished? You said, sure, I'm finished. You said, can't I see you're finished? And I said, well, I can see you're not finished. And you said, well, I'm finished. You know, Michael, when we were talking a couple of months ago, you said something quite amazing about the left side of your body when I asked you about it. And I'm going to quote your very words. You said of your left side, I know it is an integral part of myself, but it feels divorced from the rest of my person. Now, I want you to look at me and to tell me where I touch you. Am I touching you?
My right hand.
And now?
The right again.
Just the right?
And slightly underneath, almost to the palm.
I'm only touching the right hand.
Right, that's right.
Look down and see what I'm doing. What am I doing?
You're touching my right hand.
Am I doing anything else?
No.
Well, I will inform you that I'm touching your left hand as well.
Uh-huh.
Right.
You're sneaky in that.
Right. Now, let's do a little bit of drawing, and I'm terrible about drawing, and I draw a person. Give him a body and some arms and legs. As he has lost the left half of himself, so he has lost the left half of the world. It doesn't occur to him that anything would happen on that side. That side doesn't exist for him. It's outer space so far as he's concerned.
This is not one of my strong points. A Picasso, I am not.
Okay. When you did it, did you realize that you had missed out what would have been, what for you is on the left? Did you know?
At that point, no.
One of the things about, I think, the notion of a fixed program or a computer is that it's disembodied, and we are embodied. All our perceptions and all our thoughts and all our aspirations are lodged here in the body, and in its movement and its exploring the world, and in the continuous flow of sensation and the continuous updating of sensation.
Losing the power of sensation and movement produces an altered sense of self. For it is through our body that we relate to the world and understand our place in it.
When I first came to this country, I called with great enthusiasm on Marvin Minsky, who was such a major thinker in terms of artificial intelligence. And I'm fascinated by this. But my own experience and what I see in my patients makes me feel more and more that the brain is not like a computer, at least in its higher processes, in its ability to perceive and to form perceptual categorizations and to construct a world and a self. And world and self are always mutually related. You can't have one without the other.
I think we can now say, yes, it is not possible to talk about human memory or animal memory. It is not possible to talk about human knowledge without talking about subjectivity, without talking about the notion of the self. And these are not abstract arguments. These are arguments based on neurological data.
So what is a self?
It has to be a biological and a personal and a historical idea. I don't think that disembodied consciousness makes any sense. I think consciousness depends upon having a living body which is in a world and in a rich world, a living body which is exploring the world, which is categorizing its experience, and which has a personal center, a feeling of I, to which everything is referred and from which everything comes.
It seems that there is no escape from the subjective, the personal. Our experiences, our sensations, our memories will not fit into a mechanistic formula. In fact, not only does life defy description in this way, but the very laws which are used to quantify the world are ultimately non-mechanistic. Mathematics itself rests its authority not on advanced computations, but on a quality inherent in human consciousness.
I think there are two reasons for believing that there is something in thinking which goes beyond computation. One of these is the fact that we have perceptions at all, whether we can perceive a color like red or something like that. And it's really very hard to understand how anything of that nature could simply arise out of a computation. That mere calculation alone can't be what evokes internal feelings. More importantly, there's a famous result due to the logician Gödel, and he showed that any set of rules, if you believe those rules to be consistent and believe them only to give you true results, then from that knowledge you can construct a mathematical proposition which lies beyond the rules. But nevertheless, you can see that that proposition is true. And the seeing that it is true comes from your understanding of the rules and your belief in those rules. But it's not possible merely computationally to come to this conclusion. So there's something that we do with our conscious thinking and our understanding that cannot be done merely by computational rules. Well, that's not there yet. I haven't got 33 yet. For each cube, you'd find there are three through faces.
There are then certain mathematical statements that mathematicians can see are true, but for which no set of rules laid down in advance can demonstrate as true. The ability to recognize the truth lies in the potential of the conscious mind to go beyond computation.
Consciousness has tended to be a bit of a taboo in science. I suppose it's been connected with mystical ideas and so on, and thought of as not something worthy of serious scientific attention. I think this is to some extent changing, And that there are now even some good experiments on, the timing of consciousness and things like this, which mean that people are taking the issue seriously. And I think, in my own view, there's no question that there is an actual phenomenon which is present, certainly in myself, and I believe present in other people, and I believe present also in many animals. So I think there's a physical phenomenon which we're going to have to understand. We don't understand it yet, but I believe it is a physical phenomenon. And it's something which lies outside anything which can be described entirely in computational terms. I think we're going to have to understand it in physical terms, but I think also the physical terms that we're going to need to explain this are going to have to lie beyond the physics that we at present know. I think our present physics is not broad enough to encompass the phenomenon of consciousness.
This sense that we need a broader and non-mechanistic approach is taken further by the biologist, Dr. Richard Dixie.
People often think that scientists are completely crazy. And one of the reasons is because they have a language that they use that doesn't seem to apply to life. It just applies to science. This has worried me all my scientific life. And I've looked to see where I can find other places where the language of perception is used. And one of those places is undoubtedly in Eastern culture, in the language of Buddhism. And so I've gone there to look for that language. It's not to say that I'm rejecting Western culture, but the problem is it just doesn't contain within it any room for us. I'm sure that wasn't true 400 years ago. There was undoubtedly manual upon manual of inner work written in the medieval world. But in the modern world, man has been displaced. Man is no longer at the center of the universe. If you go to the East, you'll still find man at the center of his universe. And that's one of the reasons why I've looked there.
In Buddhism, the exploration is of the inner world rather than the outer. Richard Dixie is drawn to this focus on self.
Of course, if you make the process of perception a central theme in a body of knowledge, then the knowledge has terms within it that you don't find within science. There are terms for intuition, there are terms for feeling, there are terms for meaning, which are not present within scientific language today. In Western culture, we've tended to look out for the truth, look away from ourselves. But in Eastern culture, they've looked inward for the truth. Perhaps you can find truth in both places, in fact, find a combination of the two. It's not that we're going to throw away everything we've learned or empty the laboratories or whatever. It's that the observer is part of the process. So we experience as well as experiment. We have a larger view of life, if you like, a scientific view of nature, as well as a view of the machine of nature. It's to live more fully, to perceive more fully, instead of just studying the natural world. And of course, at the end of the day, it comes back to us, because we are the observer. There's no one else. I can't look through the world in any other way than through my own eyes. So I'm part of what I'm looking at. Scientific objectivity, in terms of looking away from ourselves at the external world, is no longer viable. We are part of our own picture.
In the beginning, the world lay quiet. There was no vegetation, no living or moving thing on the bare bones of the mountains. No wind blew across the peaks. There was no sound to break the silence. The world was not dead. It was asleep, waiting for the soft touch of life and light.
Ayers Rock is a sacred site in the Aboriginal story of creation. According to Aboriginal beliefs, their country didn't exist until the ancestors named each feature in song. The country came into being because it was first conceived in the mind's eye. The naming brought it to life. Today, Aborigines sing the ancestors' songs to recreate the world around them. Some scientists believe that human consciousness plays a role in turning possibility into actuality, that our observation influences reality.
Well, in daily life, we think of objects like rocks, for example, as being solid, but when you actually investigate their internal structure, this solidity dissolves away into ghostly patterns of vibrating energy. And something like an atom or an electron turns out on close inspection not to be just like a scaled-down version of a billiard ball, but something which is far more nebulous, far more fuzzy in its properties. So, for example, an electron can have both wave and particle-like aspects. It may sometimes behave like a wave, sometimes like a particle. And both these aspects reflect some sort of reality, but we can't see both of them at the same time. So we can measure, for example, the position of an electron, and then what we see is an electron at a place. Or we can measure the speed of an electron, and then we see an electron with the speed. But if we measure the one, then we disturb the other, and we disturb it in an irreducible way, an inevitable way. So the important thing is that whether we reveal the wave-like aspect or the particle-like aspect of the electron depends upon whether we choose to measure its motion, its speed, or whether we measure its position. And this is a choice that's up to us. We, the observers, can decide whether we will, in some sense, create an electron at a place or an electron with a speed. And this seems to weave the observer and the observed together in a very, very intimate way.
This connection between the observer and the observed, between us and the rest of the universe, has always been recognized in Aboriginal culture. There, everything has its place in a universe of which we have always been a part. Having devastated the Aboriginals' bond with the land, it now looks as if the West is recovering a sense of unity, long part of Aboriginal culture.
In the old physics, observers were just somehow detached from reality. The physical world was out there and the observers were in here, and there was no real link between the two. But in the new way of looking at it, in the new physics, the observer and the observed are tangled together in an inextricable way. It's not really possible to separate the two. So we have a more holistic view of reality in which everything is folded together into a unity. Ever since Copernicus, human beings have been pushed progressively further and further from the center of the stage until we seem to have only a trivial role in the great scheme of things. But quantum physics brings us back firmly to the center of the stage because we really do seem to play a fundamental role in the workings of the processes of nature. And this I find tremendously inspiring because it means that, that my own individual life seems to have much more purpose. It seems as though the existence of mind and consciousness in the universe is something that is in some sense meant to be. It's actually interwoven into the nature of reality in a very fundamental way. So in some sense, we're not just a trivial add-on to the universe, not just like extras that have stumbled onto the great cosmic set just by accident. We are truly written into the script. We're really meant to be here.
Light and all atomic particles can be both wave and particle, and will become whichever we choose to observe. Could this tell us something about consciousness?
When you take light, for instance, and measure it, you can make it look like particles, or you can make it look like a series of waves. And the way you do this is the way you design the experiment. So consciousness chooses to make light manifest itself as a wave or make it manifest itself as a particle. It's as though consciousness acts as a midwife to reality. It takes possibility and turns it into actuality. Not only does quantum mechanics raise the question of consciousness, but I think that there is a more fundamental link here. See, there's very sound evidence that human consciousness probably is quantum mechanical in nature, that some system in our brain has a quantum mechanical basis to it, that's generating the structure of our consciousness, or some parts of the structure of our consciousness. Now, this is terribly important for understanding what we're like as persons. It's very important for human psychology. It's particularly so when you consider that our traditional psychology has come from mechanistic physics. Freud was very influenced by Newton's work and wanted to emulate it in the realm of psychology, and he gave us a Newtonian picture of the personality. Freud's psychology of object relations is all about these little billiard ball-like particles, objects he called them, who are locked away in their own space and time. And for Freud, intimacy was impossible. Relationship was impossible. He thought that we came up and bounced off and clashed with one another and never got inside each other. Now, if you apply the wave-particle metaphor to human relationship and think that we are both particles, individuals, in our own space and time, and waves, things that can overlap and combine with others, then you have a basis here for seeing how we could get into relationship with other people. Indeed, you can even perhaps see how we could get into relationship with other generations. Because if we have a wave nature which transcends space and time, and which reaches across the boundaries of our own brains and can impinge on the brains of others, you can see a way that my personality can get taken up and woven into the personality of another with whom I am in intimate relationship.
The tradition of comparing mind with mechanism seems at last to be changing. Scientists are finding that a more holistic approach seems to reflect the world we all experience. For some, however, the true challenge lies not in understanding our place in the world as we now find it, but imagining what our life might be like in the far future. From the Bible Belt of the United States comes a theory which offers the most explicit link to date between science and religion. The claim is that theology has become a branch of physics, that mathematical formulae prove the resurrection.
Gloria, Gloria. Gloria, Gloria. In excelsis Deo.
The resurrection in question is a resurrection of mind and body. All that we are and enjoy in this world, we will experience in the next. We shall be perfect simulations living in a perfectly simulated world.
What I am meaning by resurrection is, remarkably enough, exactly the same thing that's taught in the churches of the United States and Great Britain. The literal resurrection of the dead.
Tipler's resurrection depends on our life, our hopes, our thoughts being encapsulated in a computer program. But rather than see this as a negation of self, it is intended to provide the means for eternal life.
What are we now? What we now are bits of information being moved around in the real universe. You can give numbers about how much information would be required to reproduce as a perfect simulation in a computer, not only me here at this desk, but also the entire visible universe in which we all of us human beings actually live. It's an enormous number, but the crucial fact is it's finite.
The theory. In order for intelligent life to survive, it must grow until it spreads throughout the universe. As the universe hurtles towards its end, the energy it releases can be harnessed by life. Tipler defines life as information processing incorporated at this stage in an all-powerful computer. With an infinite capacity to process information, it will simulate everyone who has ever lived.
The human mind, the human soul, is a computer program being run on a wet computer called the human brain. That's in essence what a human being is. Now, what you in principle you can do is scan the pattern, see what sort of information is coded in the neurons, and transfer it into a computer. You could also transfer the entire, make a perfect copy of the human body, transfer that as a simulation inside a computer.
Coincidentally, the task of simulating an actual person has already been tackled by computer scientists at Geneva University.
Human head, body, hands, feet. Compose. Symmetry. Rotation.
I'm so pretty. Don't you like me?
You will not be a disembodied spirit when you are brought into being again in the computers of the far future. Your body will be there. The entire world in which you now exist will also be there. Simulating us, giving us heaven, if you like, in the simulated world of the far future will cost them virtually nothing. For example, it would be possible to create an entire visible universe, a simulation of our present universe, exact in all details, for each individual human being who now exists. The cost of that, from our point of view, is unbelievable. The cost of that, from their point of view, it's insignificant. It would be possible, for example, for these beings in the far future to simulate, say, 10 billion Earths, pristine planets, for the private use of each individual human being who now exists. The interesting thing is that the mechanism of resurrection, remember, will be the intentional act of a super-intelligent being to bring us back into existence. Now, of course, I needn't tell any of the viewers watching this program that that's exactly the mechanism of the afterlife, of the resurrection of the dead in the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. Namely, the dead, long after the earth has disappeared, will be resurrected by the conscious act of God. I was raised as a Christian, as a Baptist in southern Alabama, but I rejected this religion and became an atheist at the age of 16, and I remained an atheist until I became an expert in global general relativity. Global general relativity, I should mention, is discussing the structure of the universe looked at as a whole. Now, in looking at the universe as a whole, you quickly realize that most of the universe is in the far future. The innate logic of my own profession caused me to look at the structure of the universe in the far future, and I realized I could get a hold on that structure only by assuming that life continued to exist forever, and the megapoint theory just fell out of the physics. And I'm truly amazed that my own science is forcing me away from atheism.
And a husband and wife are coming now to be baptized. First, Tina Johnson will come, and Mr. Johnson, would you stand here at the back?
Professor Tipler is offering a union between science and religion. His idea of the life everlasting is a traditional religious one. The way to this life, strictly scientific.
This is Tina Johnson. In obedience to the divine command of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, I baptize you, my sister in Christ, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, buried with him in baptism.
But for some theologians, Tipler's resurrection theory poses serious dilemmas. They do not see the resurrection as a kind of resuscitation of body and soul, but rather a transformation of the entire self. This must be open to every human being, not just to those who can be said to process information. Defining life in this way would seem to exclude the mentally handicapped. If they cannot process information, does that mean they are not alive? How would they figure in the world of perfect simulations?
Arthur was born with a very small brain, because he had been deprived of oxygen in the womb. And he has never developed the full consciousness of a normal human being. Now, in lots of ways, that experience has raised many of these questions for me, because I don't think it makes sense to say that there is a real Arthur trapped inside his physical body, because his personality, if you like, has been stunted in its development by his limited brain capacity. I have to ask myself questions about the kinds of consciousness that he has, the kinds of relationships that he has, the ways in which he reacts, which express things like love and joy and peace, and the kind of ways he relates to the human community. It seems to me that Arthur's personality in this life is very much bound up with his physical being, limited as it is. And yet, if one believes in God, there is a real possibility that just as everybody else will be reconstituted, presumably, in a way which transcends their present capacity, because we're all limited, so it may be that Arthur may be reconstituted in a way which transcends his present limitations.
Arthur in the garden.
The way we connect to the world and with one another, the way we experience and express ourselves, seems ultimately to depend on relationship.
One of the confusions that we've had, and this is a confusion that's existed, I think, throughout history, we've confused the kind of information we can record in books, and more recently in computers, with the kind of information that actually exists in our brains. And in fact, when you bring up the question of consciousness, and you realize that consciousness is a dynamic set of relationships, like, for example, when you take motion pictures, it's the relationship between the frames that give us the notion of motion. There's no motion stored in our brains as such. You begin to realize that the information that we record in books, or the information we record in computers, is like a series of snapshots of a process that is quite different that is going on in our brains. And therefore, the structure of human knowledge has nothing to do with the structure of information that we store in books or the structure of information that we can store in computers. And there's no way you can manipulate that information in the computer at the present time that could create the kind of structure that, in fact, is human knowledge, which ultimately depends upon consciousness and also upon a notion of self.
If science wants to understand the brain, it has to acknowledge not a machine, but a self in time, with a history and the power to choose its destiny.
This machine metaphor has really penetrated all aspects of human thinking. You also hear the phrase the mind machine or the weather machine. And yet what we found in physics is that the machine image of the universe is actually not a very good one. There's a sense in which matter is not machine-like. It can, as it were, come alive and have a will of its own and explore its own destiny. And so that's the reason why I think that although there's no ghost in the machine, it's because there really is no machine, that the whole mechanistic paradigm, the mechanistic way of looking at human beings and their behavior, really is just not appropriate. It captures some aspects of reality, but it is by no means complete.